Welcome, everyone. It's a delight to have you here today for another of our wonderful episodes, Emma Explores. Here we are in February 2025, just a couple of weeks ahead of the annual Roots Tech Conference. And it's an exciting time to really be thinking back into your family stories and with our wonderful Emma Cox diving into the stories, the background, the context as to who these people are and what they were doing. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Emma Cox, you may know from Journeys into Genealogy. Go ahead, please, Emma.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Great to be here again. And hopefully I've got something interesting to share with you. Excuse me one moment. Yes, hopefully I've got something interesting to share with you today. So I'm just going to share my screen and start my presentation. So today we're going to be talking about one of my ancestors in particular, and I've called this category engineers and manufacturers because those are two of the things that he actually did. So a little bit of background for anybody who doesn't know me. My name's Emma Cox. I'm a family historian and genealogist, and I'm based in England. I live in a place called Kent. I help people find out about their ancestors, put together family trees and charts, investigate DNA and find living relatives, edit and write books, take people on tours of the places their ancestors lived and worked, and many other things besides. As Barbara mentioned, I've got a podcast called Journeys into Genealogy, where there are now over 100 episodes. There are interviews with experts and people with interesting family stories. So the person I'm going to be talking about today, his name is Andrew Handyside. So he comes from Scotland, and this is part of my paternal ancestry. And these are just some of the things that we're going to be going through today. So there's all sorts of different things here that he or his company made back in the 19th and early 20th century. So Andrew was born in 1805 in Edinburgh. He was an engineer, and this photograph, which actually it's a drawing, comes from the National Gallery of Scotland. He is my 3 times great uncle. He was born to Hugh Handyside and Margaret Baird in Edinburgh, and he is the eldest, and he has 6 brothers, and they were all very successful, so I thought I would just actually itemize them here just to let you know. The eldest one was a merchant in Edinburgh. Number 2, Nicole, was a ship owner and merchant. Robert Baird was a ship owner and merchant. There's a bit of a theme going on here. Hugh was a writer to the signet, so that in modern terms is a solicitor. Charles was a military doctor. And James Ronaldson, who was my ancestor, he was the doctor to the Tsar in Russia. There was also a sister Anne who married Robert Buchanan, and she's significant a bit later on, and I'll tell you why. So part of his early life, so the Earl of Shrewsbury described him as the most eminent iron founder of his day in Europe. So an iron founder being literally what it talks about. It's like he made iron, and iron was used in construction. It was very important for building buildings, bridges, all sorts of different things. He spent most of his early life in Russia. So his father was connected with the Tsar, as I mentioned. His brother was connected with the Tsar, and his father was also connected as well. So he worked as a mechanical engineer for his uncle, so on his mother's side, Charles Baird. So he had an engineering works in St. Petersburg. And then he moved back to Derby in England, and he took over an existing company, and it was renamed to Andrew Handyside and Company in 1847. And it became the 2nd largest employer in Derby with over 1,200 employees. This is an example of one of the bridges that he built, or he made the ironwork for the bridge. Obviously, he didn't build it himself, but they had the ironwork. And this bridge still exists today. This is called the Albert Bridge in London. He also did railway stations, and this is a very famous one in London called St Pancras. And so you can see in the picture the construction's underway here, and you can see the ironwork actually going in. And this is taken from an article coming out of Wikipedia on the Illustrated London News from February 1868. And you can see they're actually constructing at the front of this image. This is actually the railway, the underground railway, being constructed with the rest of the overground railway station going above that. And that ironwork still exists today. So you can see that this is the Olympic rings. So back in 2012, the Olympic rings were put into there, and that's in front of the ironwork that Andrew Handyside's company built back in 1868. He was also responsible for a lot of post boxes. So in England, post boxes are mainly red, or they always used to be. So the ones you're likely to see are more like the one on the left here, which is shown in Gibraltar. However, there were special ones done. So for example, the one in London Zoo, that's got a bit of a tiger stroke zebra theme on that one. And also there were different shaped ones. So the one in the middle is a more, I think that's a octagon, probably an 8-sided or a 6-sided one there. And then the one on the right-hand side is actually from an auction. So this is somebody who's selling one. This would have been attached to a post of some sort. And this is going for quite a lot of money, £2,500. So this is actually for sale now. I found this fairly recently, and there's a link there if anybody wants to buy an old post box. And I don't know if you can see, but on the screen here, one of the images actually shows the name Handyside at the bottom of that. On the second one on the bottom row on the left, you can see it says Handyside, Derby and London. And if you were to look at any of the post boxes, you would actually see on the back of them, it says Handyside and London, generally in the black piece at the bottom of it. So you can always tell whether one of his. So post boxes weren't the only things that he made. So he made lots of different urns and things like that. So these could be for public spaces. They could be for private gardens. It really depended what people wanted to do with them. So you can see on the left-hand side there, you've got a pencil illustration showing some rather lovely women and possibly lots of fruit and things like that. And there may well have been this is like to be a fountain, and so there may well have been water coming out of some of those things, as well as flowing over the edges there. In the middle, you've got something which is being used as a planter, so that's in a public garden. And on the right-hand side, that's a drinking fountain. So those are just some examples of the different kind of things that he made. There's also a book was written about it. So he did bridges and he did roofs. So this book is called Works in Iron, Bridge and Roof Structures. And this dates back to 1877, that one is. And this is actually available for sale if anybody wanted to buy it. And this gives examples of the different things here. If I just go over to the internet, you can see if I wanted to buy this, it's £250. So unfortunately, this one won't be going on my list here. But what it does do is it shows some illustrations of the inside of it. So you can actually see the different kind of things that he manufactured and the process of actually doing that and how they were constructed. Little insight into the way that they actually made things. And it's a beautiful old book. Also, other things that are for sale now, if you fancied it, you could actually buy some of these urns to have in your own garden. And I used ChatGPT, which is an AI program, and asked it to go out and find different results for me. This was one that came up first. So this shows 5 different pairs of urns in some instances. And you can see the kind of prices they go for, anything from £1,450 up to £7,390 in some instances. So they're actually quite collectible items and they have lasted well. And what you can see on there is a patina. So the fact that they look slightly rusty, which is attractive. So people wouldn't want them to look too new. And you can even find things like old share certificates. So this is for Edward Johnson Esquire of Littleover Hill in Derby. So he bought 106% cumulative preference shares of £5 each, numbered 1851 to 1950. And he bought those in 1901. And you can see it was a large company because the capital is £170,000, which in 1901 was a significant sum of money. And let's show you where that one came from, Scripper World. And so if I wanted to find out more about that, I could actually contact them there. And examples of the other types of things that you can find online. This is via an eBay search. So this comes up with a newspaper article. And this is illustrating the cotton making process. So the presses that we use when you've got the balls of cotton to actually start making it into something which can then be woven into cloth. And this is the original. So this one's available. It's £5, which I may buy. And you can see this dates back to 1870. So it's always worthwhile having a look. And I've mentioned this before, doing things like eBay searches just to see what's out there about your ancestors or the people you're actually researching. So I found loads and loads of different sources when I was looking for this. I'm going to share those towards the end. But what I wanted to point out in particular is an album of photographs. It's on something called Flickr, which you may be familiar with. But on there are lots and lots of different recent photographs which show me different things related to Andrew Handyside. So you can see on here, we've got examples of the different buildings. So this is a place in Bath, which is a market, part of the station. This is the house that he lived in Derby. You can see different examples of where the names are on some of the lamps that he made. And then things like a drinking fountain in a railway station there. This is a small pedestrian bridge over a railway line, I believe, or the waterworks. And then the different ways that the name is shown on the maker's mark on some of these. And we used to have a railway bridge not dissimilar to this when I was growing up, and I would be very intrigued to know if that was one of his, because his things ended up all over the world. So this one here is on the Isle of Man. This is actually a swing bridge. So this moves so that the boats can get in and out of the harbour. Wisbeck, Friars Gate. So this is actually in Derby itself. So there's a lot of things that he did within Derby. And then all of a sudden we're in Australia. These ones are in Geelong in Australia. Nottingham. You see there are railings around Barbados Parliament buildings. Tucuman. And I think that one might be South America, Adelaide. So basically, his things went all over the world. Argentina, Tucuman's Argentina. And there's quite a large Wikipedia page all about him with different examples on here. So, for example, you can see those are some of the street lights that he made in Belfast. And the urns in Derby Industrial Museum. And a bridge in Japan. So he did things, or his company did things with lots and lots of different designs. And then those are swing bridges over Manchester Canal, so the ships could go up and down. Another thing that I found was some old catalogues. So they were directories. So he was actually advertising in some of these. So you can see on here, the Britannia Ironworks has been established for more than 50 years. In the last 25 years, been continually extended and improved. So in here, it talks about some of the different things that he did. Alexandra Palace, Amsterdam Station, the Royal Horticultural Gardens Conservatory, floating bridge in Calcutta, markets in Madrid, India, Nottingham, and so the list goes on, including bridges on Austria, Australia, Denmark, Japan, Norway, Turkey. So his things went worldwide. So if you're ever near a bridge in whatever country you live in, have a look, see if it says Andrew Handyside or other buildings there. And if you do, please send me something. I'd love to know where they ended up and see some of your photographs. So Andrew married Anastasia Henley in St. Petersburg. There was quite an age difference. He was 33 and she was 17. Pardon me. And they were actually cousins. I think they were second cousins. Unfortunately, they never had any children. However, they adopted a child in middle life, and his niece was Robina. And she was actually the daughter of my great-grandfather, James Robertson Handyside. And do you remember I mentioned his sister Anne? Well, Anne married Reverend Robert Buchanan, and their son Alexander, he was Andrew's nephew, became his business partner and later managing partner, and he took over running the business after he retired, after Andrew retired. So the death and obituary. So he had a big obituary in the Derby Mercury of 1887, where it talks about him and his work. And it says that he's been living in Derby. He basically has set up a large company there. And he was even a director of the Derby and Derbyshire Banking Company and member for Bridge Ward. So he was one of the local MPs, not a member of parliament, a local parish councillor, that would be effectively, we will call it in this country. And so it talks about his funeral, and then it talks about who actually attended his funeral and the order of the procession even. So who was in which carriage. And it says that so the workmen and everybody who worked for him attended. So the church was very crowded. And then various people actually contributed flowers and things for it. So I mentioned that I use quite a few different sources. So I just wanted to go through some of those with you now and actually share some of the ones I haven't shown you. So we had a quick look at Wikipedia. Science Museum has got something. So if you've got any museums in your country, wherever you're based, have a look and see if there's anything in there that is relevant for the person you are actually researching. So basically there's an entry for him in the Science Museum, which is one of the large museums in this country. The National Gallery of Scotland. So we saw his photograph right back at the beginning, or his pencil illustration portrait. This website here was set up by somebody who is an enthusiast of Andrew Handyside, and there is an extensive website where they're trying to bring together all the different things that he actually constructed. Obviously it's not complete, and if you know of any that aren't on here, I'm sure that the person who actually runs this will be very happy to know about that, so please do contact them. So you can see bridges and viaducts, fountains and vases, railway stations, pillar boxes, and then other items. Vintage machinery. So this mentions different people within it. So you may well find if you have a manufacturing ancestor. I think this actually goes even across to America, as it mentions people there. So have a look and see if your ancestors are on there. ProQuest. So this is a document that I can download, and this will actually show me an article on Andrew Handyside. So this gives me details of how he actually, his company went, and some of the different things that he did in that article there. Google searches for items. Grace's Guide. Grace's Guide is one I don't know I've mentioned before. This basically talks about people who were involved in manufacturing. So this could be cars, it could be all sorts of different things. So this talks about him and gives example of the Leeds Fine Art Exhibition building there, so you can see what it was actually constructed of and the drawing for the finished building. The cotton press, which is probably related to the one that I showed you, which was the eBay one earlier on. And again, another advert here. So this talks about all the sort of different things that he does. So he made hearths and forges and different things so that other people could do construction work and manufacturing work themselves. Derbyshire Archaeological Society and Derby Museum and Art Gallery. So again, if there are any local museums and art galleries or archaeological societies, historical societies, it's worthwhile having a look at those just to see if there are any that are relevant to you. The Friends of Friargate Bridge. So this has basically been set up again. This is all about Friargate Bridge and Andrew Handyside, and talks about where his factory was located and all sorts of different things here. Derby Photos we looked at, and then the Aid Books one we looked at, eBay searches, Flickr Photos. The Internet Archive is also a resource that deserves more attention than it may get. So this is an illustrated catalogue of fountains and vases, and basically this shows some of the different things that he actually constructed. So just flicking through things here briefly. I'm just going to go move across slightly more. And this is where that illustration came from. Some of the different types of lots of different vases that he made. Art UK. So he's sorry, just get rid of that. He's considered an artist, or his company is considered an artist. Then some of the things are the artwork. So the drinking fountain image came from here. That's a different type of drinking fountain there. Again, in Derbyshire, that one. Scripper World for the share certificates. You saw that one. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. Any questions from anybody?
Just unmuting, and I've just unmuted you, Linda.
No.
And you have to turn your own video on, but I'll turn my own on too, since I'm getting so fancy to do it for you. There we are.
Yeah.
That was wonderful, Emma. Thank
Oh.
you. That was great fun. What a romp.
It was, wasn't it? Went lots of different places there.
It certainly had me, I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is, well, we're directly across from the San Francisco Peninsula, where, the from 1849, with the discovery of gold, the city just turned into a gold rush, as everybody was there selling, as they say, picks and jeans for all of the gold miners. And they're the ones who actually made a lot of money, like Levi and Company. And up through the 1880s, which was a really wild and crazy time out here, there was a lot of huge money coming into the city. And I just did a quick rush. I haven't found anything yet of constructions and things that might have brought delicate, fancy things from England as part of construction. I do know, I sort of remember there's a lot of so-called wrought iron gates and things like that that were manually wrought. And I sort of understood that sometime in like maybe the 1880s or late 70s, that there was some kind of a new innovation in technology that made it possible to press these gates. So they became very cheap. And we have them everywhere here. It's just everything built up until the 20s are all built with this kind of wrought iron gates and things like that. Am I right about that?
There was
About it
something
being a
that's
manufacturing innovation?
Yes, there would have been something like that. I don't know. I haven't actually investigated so much in terms of how he made his things. I know what he did in terms of the design and the finished construction. The process in the middle, not my area of expertise.
Well, it certainly sounds like he was not only an innovator of the design, but also the right man at the right time to just double down on, taking this new technology to make a massive business out of it. Wow.
I must admit, when I
Global.
started looking into this, doing this research, it's like I was aware of him and I'd done some things, but I didn't realize quite how far it spread and how much he'd done. And sort of literally pretty much major cities across the world, all sorts of different things, bridge construction. There were at least a dozen different countries mentioned there, if not more.
Yeah. And you take something like Japan, where he had a bridge built. I didn't catch the year for that bridge, but remember that Japan was completely locked out of, or rather locked foreigners out of the country completely until the 1850s. So, it was a really big deal to bring a foreigner in building a Western bridge in Japan. Japanese are pretty proud of their bridges. And to do it with iron, it's like iron boats. Really big deal at the time. That's amazing.
And that apparently that one was the Koshiji Bridge in Niigata, and that was made in 1896.
Later, yeah. Niigata is way up on the north western corner of Honshu, the main island. It's very cold and snowy up there. Beautiful, beautiful area, I'll add. Wow, that's so cool. Now I'm going to go, since we're connected, I'm going to go out and see if he's a relation of mine in some distant way.
How cool.
I've just been trying to see if he did anything in Canada, but I don't see anything, but here's an urn, a 19th century urn, it says for sale. $1,903 Canadian.
Wow.
But I don't see that I wonder, I can't find anything that he's done other than that in Canada, right?
Mm.
I'm wondering if there's any bridges, but I don't see anything. I see there's a crest. Do you have the crest and the side?
Well, not a crest. No, I'll have to have
Well,
a
it
look for
looks
that.
like family crest and coat of arms, it says.
Okay, I'm always a little bit wary about things where it says family crest and coat of arms, because a lot of those have been made up more recently, and there's only actually very, very few people who were entitled to actually have a coat of arms and a crest and
Oh,
things. It's like you can't just have it because somebody in your family had it.
oh,
Yeah, you need to be a little careful with that.
I just see it advertised here. So when did he die? He died in the 1910, was it? Or
I believe around about then.
yeah,
Sorry, I'm
yeah.
just looking up something else.
Is he the 1887?
Yeah, 1887, so earlier. The company carried on for another 20 odd years.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah, so it was run by his nephew.
Oh, right. You said his nephew was taking
Mm,
over, right?
mm.
Yeah. I wonder
And
how come
I
it didn't continue.
And I think it was to do with the circumstances in terms of trade and business and things like that. And it's just, it, things changed in terms of construction methods and things, I think, as well. So he was there during the boom times, and
Sure.
then it became more difficult.
Yeah.
yeah, had to be a tough business after that.
Yeah.
Looking it up since you're in family search and he is too, 11th cousin.
Of you? Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. Look at that.
because she pointed the way.
It's probably related to half the world. You never really know, do you?
Exactly. You have at least a million and a half 10th cousins. So, what are the chances? It's
Interesting.
connected already to a 10th cousin. That's so cool. That's so cool. I also, you gave us some really wonderful uh references and links, and most of all, honestly, the creativity of where to look. I always enjoy. I'm going to be pulling those out of the slides when the slides will be in the notes here, but I'm going to be pulling those to add into the notes because they're always so fabulous to be able to just click right there and go straight to them. In fact, as I think I've been working on this Lafayette project, which is essentially it's almost like I'm doing the same thing with Lafayette during this period of his life and then slapping it all into a timeline. And the process of doing this has me really thinking about how I might make it easier for others. And there is, because he was a famous dude that slept in every bed all over town, you know, there's a lot of fake information. There's a lot of bad information about who he was and where he, what he did. Well, not a lot about, oh, well, anyway. So, things of looking in Flickr, for example, is a great idea. I had really not been pursuing that one as obvious as it might seem to you. Um,
That wasn't obvious to
because
me.
I'm
I
not
have to
looking for
say that
modern,
a lot of these things come from Google searches. So start with a Google search and see what comes
right,
up as a result of your Google search. And as you've seen with this, it can take you in many, many different directions. And sometimes you come
right.
across a little gold mine. I mean, the Friars Gate, Friends of Friars Gate, they've got lots of different things on there. So if somebody's done something well known, see if there is a friends group locally and what information they
Yeah,
actually have, and if they've got a website or if they've got things that they're
yeah.
prepared to share.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I mean, at this point for this project, what I'm hoping to do is to get a baseline. You have to have, as with most things, you have to find one thing that holds still, one thing that that stake is the stake in the ground that you can count on. And then you can go test everything else against it. In this case,
Yeah.
I have now the American Friends of Lafayette, a wonderful organization that goes across the United States with people who celebrate stuff that he did before and after the bicentennial. They're just doing it all the time. And they gave me a reliably, historically checked and reviewed timeline. So it's kind of like birth and death dates and places. So, for example, I was talking to someone who's in Raleigh, and I suddenly said, "Oh, wait a minute, was he in Raleigh? Raleigh's the wait a minute, was he?" And then I go back and I say, "Yes." Well, then what and where? And the thing broke that he saw, but there was a poster of it, and the poster is in the frick or the lithograph, and there we are. So I'm hoping to build it into something that people could build on in exactly the same way you do, where you've got here is the piece that I found, and here is the link to it, here is the source, and here is the background, and here is it against this known thing. In my case, I'm doing a known thing that is a timeline. But it's actually quite similar. And maybe I'm just wrapped up in it. But I also love how this ties into the history of technology, in the sense that, steel, iron, the Industrial Revolution, cotton, if I may say, slave trade, these kinds of things were foundational to the economic boom that not only grew Britain, but also certainly our countries in the Anglophone world. And understanding how that history worked and the technologies that drew it, you're drawing this into such a wonderful personal story that you can go and find the labels for all over the planet.
I think it'd be fun. I really would love it if anybody found an Andrew Handyside thing, if that's a bridge, if it's a building, if it's a post box, if it's a whatever, send me it. I'd love to see a photograph of it.
Oh, we will definitely go on a hunt. Have you done a Google image, Google Lens search for the Handyside? Yeah, that might turn up. It doesn't,
to be quite honest with him, it was almost a case of too much information. And I was thinking, okay,
yeah.
I can't put all of that in. Okay, he's got so many different urns. There's lots of different auction results. There's all sorts of different things. I could have put loads and loads more in there. So I had to try and cut out some bits and just think, okay, it's like and make it sort of relatively make it interesting, but not make it so it's too repetitive, because I could have gone on and done lots of other things.
Right. But that's what I mean. If you drill into what part of this is the interesting part that you want to build on, like where else in the world might these things be found, then you're looking for something different. This first round, you were building a story about this guy, which you did.
Yeah.
Now you've got all us hooked. So now it's like, well, what about where else was it? Well, I don't know. Let's go look. Hook it all into a map, easy peasy. And explore it that way to sort of really starts to tell a larger story, which is a story of the Industrial Revolution in Britain and how that expanded. I have to think that places like Manchester, where Dean Kirby writes these wonderful stories about the
Mancunians.
Mancunians. And I'll bet there's a lot of this kind of work there, right?
And you were talking about technology. So, and obviously this is a while ago, modern technology and everything. And I've been recently looking into AI and ChatGPT. So basically I put a little search in there. I said, can you find auction results for Andrew Handyside? And then it went away and it did different things. Can I have auction results in the last year? And then it brought them back to me, and then it gave me all the links for them so that I could then go and have a little look at those. So there's a nice link to modern things as well.
What made
Yeah,
him?
that's absolutely right.
You said his dad was in Russia, and he was in Russia, this man. What made him come back to Derbyshire in England?
Okay, well, he was Scottish.
Or
So the family was Scottish, and so actually I made a mistake when I said it's his father. It was his uncle who was actually out in St. Petersburg, and he went to work for his uncle out there. So his mother's brother And
Yeah.
so I think he learnt his trade out there, and then he decided to come back and make use of that, and obviously was interested in the modern technology at the time, so iron manufacturing and things like that. And he found a company that I don't think they were doing particularly well at the time. So he decided that he would take it over and improve it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Interesting. And of course,
That's
lots of
such
things were happening then too, weren't they?
They
In
were.
like building and things like that.
Yes, and the Scots were. They say that the Scots built the empire, the British Empire, and they were very adventurous is probably a good way of describing it. They went to lots of different places. They took innovations with them. They learned from where they went to and brought things back with them. And they just went out there. So I'm really lucky when I look into some of my Scottish ancestry and to see that there are different people there. And it's like I may well try and find out more about Charles Baird and his side of it, because there were quite a few other people who different things, and there's somebody in another part of the family tree, and he had something to do with the first, I think it was the first steam engine to do with making ships in Glasgow, something like that, and people came to look at it or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. I'm fairly sure it wasn't him, it was somebody else. So there's all these tiny little nuggets that I find when I start looking. And you have to be quite careful, because all of a sudden you can find yourself going down lots of different rabbit holes in a way, and you can find yourself looking at 5 different people and say, okay, you'll focus on one to start with and then try and go and do the other ones afterwards, and then see. It's interesting to see if there are patterns. I have mentioned patterns previously, but if there are patterns in what people do, if people take over companies, and if they do take over companies, if they keep them going in the same way, or if they change and evolve, and if they modernize and they keep them going. So I think it's actually quite difficult to keep a company going for more than 2 or 3 generations. You'll find a lot of family companies disappear after that time. I don't know what the reason might be. It might be the circumstances of what's happening in the environment around them, but it might be that the person who set it up had very different values from the person who took it, who has inherited it and carried on, and they might not necessarily want to do things the same way. Who knows? But it's really interesting when you start looking into it and seeing more in the way of trends and what people did. And if people weren't necessarily in the same business, they were in an allied business of some sort. So, for example, his brothers, a lot of them were ship owners and merchants. So obviously there were people who did a lot of trading. So they would have been had access to information. They would have known about things that were coming from other countries, all sorts of things like that.
access to capital, big time.
Mm. Mm.
You know, shipping ironworks around the world had to be doggone expensive, and
Mm.
you know, insurance and all of those kinds of things. So they must have had huge access to capital in order to make that kind of profit from that kind of work.
You saw
I'm
the
reminded of
capital
the
of the
Bechtel
business.
family.
Yeah, the capital of the business. I can't remember if that's 120,000 or 170,000 on that share
Oh,
certificate.
capitalization, 170,000 pounds. Yeah,
Yeah,
in
that's a lot of
18
money in those days for
something.
one company.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I'm reminded of the Bechtel and Company, which is based here and has, you know, is wholly owned family company, and they do construction of bridges and dams and things all over the planet. And it's like 4th generations or something now. It's kind of amazing. Getty Oil, and a lot of them big American companies had been that way in the oil business, but um, yeah. Wow. Well, this has been such fun. You have sent me off into everything from the Hathi Trust to looking around. I will keep my eyes open, certainly, and that period of time is just fascinating. And since I've often talked about how we have photographs from, you know, the middle of the 19th century forward, as if that's when family history began. No, that's just when we have the photos for them. And,
Yeah.
you know, with so many of these technological innovations that led to construction that could last for centuries, you know, it was the early 19th century things like foundations and you know, innovations like that that made these possible. We had, you know, earthquakes and fires that toasted a lot of it, but the things that survived were iron and protected. Turns out that in San Francisco, one of the key areas that was protected from the fires that fell after the great earthquake in 1906 were, in fact, built in brick. They just happened to be on relatively stable ground, so they didn't fall apart from the earthquake. They were where all of the whiskey was kept. So the firefighters did everything they could to make sure that area was protected.
Of course.
The Barbary Coast. Well, again, I want to thank you so much, Emma, for all you do in these programs. Why don't we wind this one up and prepare the online to carry forward? Do you want to give us any tips for next month?
I haven't decided yet. I will let you know soon.
Oh,
I have various
excellent.
different things to
How
choose
about-
from, so I'm going to go and have a look and to see who I fancy writing about this time and talking about.
How about this? Where do you get your ideas
Well, I
about
get
what
my
to
ideas.
focus on for these?
I get my ideas all over the place. It's like if I come across a story and I think, oh, and I start investigating and think there's more to it. You've got more than just the birth, marriage, and death details or the people on the census or anything like that. You can find out things if you start looking for them. You can find things that they've constructed or books they've written or something that they've been involved with. It's where you can actually find people. So it's worthwhile if you're looking for when you're doing your ancestors, do Google searches to start with and just see what comes up, and then make a note of anything interesting that you come across with the idea that you can either investigate that now or you can put it to one side and come back to it later.
You are the master of coming back to it later. That was a wonderful tidbit. I really appreciate that. We're going to be sharing that in terms of the larger picture of the kinds of wonderful stories that you bring to us in this series. So with that, let me conclude the recording and thank you all for joining, including those of you online. Feel free to drop your questions and thoughts here. And whatever you do, don't miss the regular podcast series, Journeys into Genealogy, when Emma herself brings in special guests with some fabulous, fabulous leads and stories that will inspire you in your own research. Thank you again.